Mayor Chancellor, you may start the meeting.
Thank you so much. So we were calling the Community Planning and Economic Development Committee meeting to order. And I'm just going to take a quick attendance for people that are here. I can see from committee members, I see Beth Kerrigan and Lee Gold, and then council members Ben Winograd. Is there anybody that I missed? Okay, and then so we will go to approval of the agenda. I need a motion from committee members and a second to accept the minutes that we.
I move to accept the minutes.
Thanks, Lee.
Second.
Beth, thanks, Beth. All right, motion's been made second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, so the minutes are approved. And then Matt, we will go over to you on this very, very important and long and long committed plan of the stormwater. Go over to you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Before I introduce the subject, I just want to ask Ms. Reinheimer once again to resend the link to the full council. Deputy Mayor Davidoff is trying to get on. All right, great. Well, good morning, everyone, committee members and staff, and Ms. Baumann from CDM Smith. It's good to see you all this morning. And yes, as the mayor said, we are talking about our very important drainage study. This is the second study that we have engaged in regarding this general area of town. It's our third stormwater study overall. This morning, we're going to be making an informational presentation to the committee. We do have some cost estimates built into the presentation, but we're not at the stage yet where we have a financing plan for those improvements that's been fully developed. Now, this is the we're at the study stage. And then following that, we would need to engage in design and then eventually implementation. So I would ask the folks we have with us here today to help discuss this topic from town staff. We have our interim director of community development, town engineer, Dwayne Martin. We have our assistant town engineer, Greg Summer. We also have one of our civil engineers and our drainage expert on staff, Julie Vieira, on the line. And then from CDM Smith, the consultants who've conducted the study, we have Cindy Baumann and Joe La Liberté. So let me turn it over to Mr. Martin through you, Mayor, to make his own introductory comments, and then we'll turn it over to CDM Smith to make the presentation, and then we can engage in Q&A.
Thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Martin, you're up.
Good morning, everyone. Dwayne Martin, Town Engineer and Acting Director of Community Development. So CDM Smith's going to go through a quick presentation for you to give you an update on their second study and the recommendations from that. And that'll lead into how do we move forward with collectively all of the drainage recommendations. And rest assured, we as staff and with the town manager have been talking about prioritization of these projects and also potentially working collaboratively with the NBC to address some other issues related to drainage. And also we are still pursuing grants for the potential funding of these projects. So without further ado, I would like to have the presentation start with CDM Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Do you see the presentation?
Not yet, Cindy.
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh,
Do you
Now
know?
it's loading.
yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I'm going to go through, this is phase 2 of the study. We did present phase 1 to you probably a year and a half ago. And then I also have some information on a previous study that was done on the culverts. So I'm going to go just with the project overview, then I'm going to go over some existing conditions for the phase 2, the recommendations that we have for that area, costs, and then I'm going to go over the prioritization that Dwayne had mentioned of phase 1, phase 2. And then we do have a groundwater study that we've started and then some next steps. So at first, in 2018, the town had a study done by Malone and McBroom, who's now SLR, and it was for recommendations for culvert replacements along Trout Brook. And those are 5 culverts that go from Trout Brook Drive through the Yukon campus, across Lola, up under Lindy Lane and up to Albany Ave. And so that information has been incorporated in this prioritization, and it will be included in later slides. And then we did a phase 1 of the drainage study, which included areas 1, 2, and 3. And you can see that we did the final report in June of last year. We did have our town council workshop and 2 public information meetings. The town did submit for some grants in January of 2021. And then continuing MDC coordination, both for the phase 1 and also for the phase 2. So phase 2 drainage study, which is areas 4, 5, and 6, which I'll show you in a little bit where those are. That occurred from January to July of this year. We did a draft report in July, and then we're having our town council and public information meetings this fall. And the MDC coordination is ongoing. So here's the project areas. There's 6 drainage areas. There was significant flooding within these areas that prompted this study. The significant storm events occurred in April and September of 2018 and then August of 2019. And we did have a public meeting in June of 2019 to get some information on from the public on what was flooding, where it flooded, and a lot of people participated in that. And then we completed the phase 1 study, which includes areas 1, 2, and 3, which are shown in more of a tan and orange color on this figure. We had a second public meeting in November of 2020. And then we completed the phase 2 this summer. And those are the green areas, the 4, 5, and 6. So I'm going to go over kind of zooming in. This is just the summary of phase 1, which I already presented to you, and I believe most of you were on that presentation. But these are areas 1, 2, and 3, and we did come up with recommendations in these areas. We conducted field investigations and did stormwater modeling, evaluated alternatives using that modeling and came up with recommendations. So now we're on to phase 2, which we're doing the same scope. So we completed the field survey, the modeling, the evaluation of alternatives, and we have developed recommendations. And this area includes this phase includes 3 areas. So area 4 is the area down here to the left. Sorry, guys. And it includes North Main Street, kind of runs down the easterly side of it. And then it also includes Arundel Ave and Whitman Ave and Brace Road to kind of orientate yourself. And then area 5, which is up in this area, is the St. Joseph's tributary. And that has Albany Ave running pretty much kind of through the middle of it. And it goes north to Mohawk Drive and then south to, I'm forgetting the name of this school, but it goes down towards Lola. And then area 6 is from Asylum Ave up to Albany Ave, and it includes Trout Brook Drive, and then it includes Lindy Lane and Haynes and Lola, and then Asylum and Craigmore. Just to orientate yourselves. And those are the 3 areas we're focusing on today. So I'm going to go over the existing conditions for this phase 2 study. And I'll start with area 4. Actually, this is area 6. So we did the drainage model development, which similar to the phase 1, we performed supplemental survey. There's 15 drainage systems that discharge to Trout Brook. And this area has a lot of small systems. So all the red triangles are where they discharge to Trout Brook, and then the yellow lines, and then the green junction, which typically occur at manholes. And we modeled the 10-year design storm, which is a storm that has a 10% chance of occurring in a given year. And then we also validated the models with historical storm events and documented flooding that was provided by the town engineering department and also emergency services. So overview of Area 4, it's a total of 249 acres. It does have 4 systems. So the North Main Street system is up in here. So it is North Main Street, north of where Trout Brook crosses the roadway. And then we have the Lynbrook Road system. It's this tiny system and it only includes about 4 catch basins and it discharges to Trout Brook just east of North Main Street. Then we have North Main Street South. It's the system that runs south of, it's North Main Street, but it is south of Trout Brook. And then the biggest system in Area 4 is this Arundel Ave. So all of these drainage system piping runs in a northerly direction towards Trout Brook. And this figure just, and this will continue as we present, is anytime there's a red circle, it means at that node in the system, there is flooding. So, and there is one flow split to just mention, and this is where flow comes into usually it's a manhole and then it splits. It has the ability for the flow to split from one system to the other. And that is identified as the square here. And it happens to be on the American School for the Deaf. And the flow comes down Arundel Avenue system and then splits and continues down Arundel Avenue, but also splits to the North Main Street South system. And there's a few splits as we go along, flow splits. So they're just areas to note. And typically there's modeling complexity at that location. So this is the Arundel Ave system. And I have noted where there's significant flooding based on the model. And so, as I mentioned before, anywhere where there's a red dot, it means at that node that the water is not in the system. It's actually on the surface. And you can see there's quite a bit of flooding within this system, a significant amount along Brace Road, and then also Brunswick Ave, and then Whitman and Keeney. A lot of the side streets that are tributary to Arundel Ave have the flooding within this area. So now I'll go to Area 5. So Area 5 is the one that has Albany Ave running through it, and it's up near St. Joseph's, and this is called St. Joseph's Tributary. That's what we call this area. It's 205 acres. There's one huge system, and so this whole drainage network that's shown is one large system that starts in the northeast and discharges to the southwest, and it discharges through 2 outfalls, the red triangles at the bottom left. And there are 2 flow splits in here because there's actually like 2 systems, but they have flow splits so that it functions as one. So there's a flow split at Albany Ave and Wiltshire. And then there's also one at Wiltshire and there's a cross-country system that goes behind a house. So that's where there's 2 flow splits where water comes from the upper area of the system and then can split between 2 systems that are running parallel. So in this area, St. Joseph's Tributary, there's a significant amount of locations where the model showed flooding. So once again, all the red dots are where the water is not contained within the system, and there's there's flooding documented in the model. So then Area 6, this is the one that surrounds the University of Connecticut campus. Has Trout Brook Drive running from Albany Ave down towards Asylum and then keeps going a little farther south. And there's 10 drainage systems in this area. And this one also has a flow split. So there's another location on Trout Brook Drive where flow splits and there's actually 2 outfalls for one system. So. And this system has a lot of smaller systems and doesn't have as much significant flooding as some of the areas within Area 1 and 2, areas 4 and 5. but there still are a significant amount of red dots or locations where there is flooding. And also, I hadn't mentioned, but the yellow pipes are ones that have sufficient capacity, and the blue pipes are ones that have insufficient capacity, so they do not have capacity to carry the flow coming to them. So now I'll go over for areas 4, 5, and 6. There's all the outfalls and systems within each area are shown in this table. Those that are in bold, though, are the ones that did not have capacity during either the 10-year storm or the 3 historical storms that we modeled. And so those that have check boxes to the right are the ones that we then developed recommendations. The ones that are not bold or do not have check boxes have sufficient capacity and do not currently have any recommendations. So the other thing we looked at for all 3 systems is private inflow removal. And as like we did in phase 1, we're looking at houses that need a connection for their private inflow so that they can connect it to the drainage system. And within these 3 areas, 4, 5, and 6 for phase 2, there's approximately 600 total buildings that have been identified as private inflow disconnections. So those are buildings that would need to be disconnected from the sewer and then put into the drainage system. And it's approximately 38% of all the properties within this phase 2 area. And then just to note, in areas 1, 2, and 3, MDC had already conducted the building inspections and already knew all the properties that needed to be disconnected. And within areas 4 and 5, there are portions that have not had building inspections conducted by MDC. So we made an assumption based on percentages in other areas to come up with the anticipated total number of buildings that need to be disconnected. And in order to disconnect them, there's a collector drainage system that needs to be installed. So this kind of shows you, they've already done this in the Greenhurst Road project. And the blue is actually the drainage system. And then what they do is they connect to the drainage system with collector drains and then private services. So they also, so this is a collector drain on Westbrook Road, which then provides connections for number 44, 46, and 48. And then there's also drain extensions. So in this example, Greenhurst does not have any drainage system down it. And so there would be drainage extensions provided so that the buildings can then tie into those drainage extensions. So collector drainage systems include both drainage extensions and then collector drains so that the private homes can connect to a drainage system with their sump pumps and roof leaders. So now I'm going to go over the recommendations within the phase 2 area. And so for all of the 22 systems within these areas, we evaluated them, and then those that were shown in bold are the ones that we came up with recommendations. And this one's just showing you Trout Brook Drive near Lawler. And so we came up with drainage system improvements. And then as I just explained, we also came up with like collector drains. And I use this one as an example because this is Trout Brook Drive and this is Pinecrest Road. And Pinecrest Road doesn't currently have a drainage system on it, but it would then be a recommended improvement for collector drains so that, because as you can see, the MDC has gone out and they've also identified the greenhouses as locations for disconnections. And so there would be a drain extension and then also a collector drain. So for the prioritization, we came up with a tiering system. There's 3 tiers. So the tier 1 is the high priority, and these are areas with documented flooding and then also modeled flooding during the design storm, which is a 10-year design storm or a 10% occurrence in any year, and then also the historical events. So if you had all 3 of those, documented flooding, and you had insufficient capacity during the design storm and insufficient capacity during the historical events, then your the recommendations were put into a high priority. And tier 2 is a moderate priority. So these are the ones that had modeled flooding only. They didn't have any documented flooding. So modeled flooding during the 10-year and the historical events. And then the tier 3 is the ones that just had model flooding during the 10-year design storm. So they did not have any documented flooding and they did not have any flooding during the historical events. And the historical events that we modeled were smaller than the 10-year design storm. So that's why they did not show any flooding in the modeling during those storm events. So these are the drainage systems with modeled flooding. I had shown you this before, but those with the checks are the ones that we're going to then go over. So North Main Street, Lynbrook, Arundel are all in area 4, and then area 5, the large system, St. Joseph's Tributary. And then there's approximately half of them in area 6 as well, Lindy Lane, Haynes Road, Waller Road, Asylum, and then Craigmore. So out of those that I just mentioned on the last slide, those that were provided with recommendations are on this slide, and they are then prioritized with the tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 based on their performance and their modeled and documented flooding. So what I'm going to kind of go over to just pick a few is there's 3 of them that I'm going to show you the recommendations and what is proposed in each of these. So I picked one from each area. So in area 4, we'll go over Arundel. And then area 5 will go over St. Joseph's Trib, the large one. And area 6 will go over Lawler Road. And actually, I'm starting with that one in area 6. So area 6, this gives you an example. You've seen this slide a little before, but this outfall is down near Lawler Road into Trout Brook. And on this slide, you can see that the drainage network is shown, and anything in blue has sufficient capacity and does not require any upsizing pipes. But those lines that are shown in purple would be ones that were upsized. And for example, like on Trout Brook Drive here, this first one is an existing 18, it's shown in black, but the proposed is a 24, to kind of give you an order of magnitude of what the size differential is from existing to proposed. And the table on the left does show the total amount of pipe length as well as the different sizes and pipe length required for the Lawler Road system within area 6. And then I took the St. Joseph's Tributary, and I know this is harder to see because it's such a large system. But once again, this is Route 44. And then you have Wiltshire and Lawler Road down near the outfall. And this goes all the way up and to the right. And then this is St. Joseph's School. And so there are quite a few, and it's the majority of it is the trunk line. You can see that the trunk line is in the purple, and that means that the pipe needs replacement. And then there are some feeder lines or that come in from the side roads that are blue that would not need replacing. And so this area, St. Joseph's Tributary, this system has a total of 9,900 linear feet of pipe replacement and varying in size from 18 to 54 inch. And the last one I've just used as an example is in area 4. It's the Rundle Avenue system. Once again, a very large system. This system and the St. Joseph's are the largest systems within this phase 2 study. And it's about the same amount of linear feet. You have 10,000 linear feet. And once again, you can see, so Brace Road is down to the south here. And then Arundel is in the middle. And this is North Main Street. And this is the School for the Deaf, to give you an orientation. But the proposed recommendation, you can see there's blue pipes down in this is the downstream end because the flow is going from the south to the north. But there are quite a few pipes that are tributary to the trunk line. The trunk line runs down Arundel. So all these purple pipes that are tributary to the trunk line need replacing. And then also there's a lot of documented flooding more up in the Brace Road area and the upper part of the watershed. So this recommendation actually shows a recommendation to do a diversion pipe down towards the river to the right in this area. And so we would divert the flow from the upper part of the watershed to the right to an existing outfall on Trout Brook Drive. So now I'm gonna go over some costs, and I'm gonna include both phase 1 and phase 2 for you. Phase 1 is the areas 1, 2, 3 that we went over about a year ago. And now we have phase 4, 5, and phase 2, which is areas 4, 5, and 6. But I'll start with phase 1. So just to review, to show you what we're recommending for improvements in phase 1. So these are areas 1, 2, and 3. And they're listed here, and they have the same kind of tiering system, ranging from tier 1 to tier 3. And the total cost is shown at the bottom of $44 million. And this is for the design and construction costs for the drainage systems. And then similarly for these systems, there's a cost for the design and construction of the collector drains and the drain extensions, and then also an estimate, which is not shown on here, is the private II removal. So then phase 2, so these are the recommendations in phase 2. And the tiering is shown as well. And these are the design and construction costs. And these are for all phases 1, 2, and 3. And so I didn't include a summary here of costs because I'm going to go in more detail just on the phase 1 or the tier 1 projects. And the other thing to note on this is, so Arundel Avenue, the large system that's in area 4, we actually looked at 3 different alternatives, and we've priced out those alternatives, and we are going with the diversion piping, which is actually alternative 3. So these are the conceptual design costs for the collector drains and the drain extensions in areas 4, 5, and 6. And then I'd like to kind of go over the prioritization, and this includes phase 1, phase 2, and then it also is going to include that original Malone and McBroom or the SLR study. And so just to kind of give you a little background, so Malone and McBroom in 2018, they did a study of the brooks along Trout Brook. And this map to that shows the culvert replacements in yellow. North is to the right, just so you know. And you have Asylum Avenue to the left, and then it goes up towards Albany Ave is to the right. And so there are culverts to be replaced. And so we included these culverts in our prioritization and our evaluation for both the phase 1 recommendations, the phase 2 recommendations, and then we included the culverts. So all the following slides actually have all 3 combined, all 3 projects. And they evaluated 4 culverts, but there is in the Lindy Lane and Lawler Road area, there's like a long culvert and then a junction box and then the culvert under Lindy Lane. So sometimes those are evaluated or talked about as 2 culverts, and sometimes that one is one large system. But they did come up with recommendations for proposed culverts at Trout Brook Drive, at the Yukon pedestrian walkway, and then the location I had just mentioned, the Lawler, Haynes, and Lindy area, and then also Albany Ave. So to summarize all of those, so this includes, this slide I'm showing right now, includes all the tier 1 projects. So all those projects that did not have sufficient capacity during the 10-year storm, did not have sufficient capacity during the historical storms, and had documented flooding. So these are your top, out of all the, I believe there's 27 projects within area phase 1, phase 2, and the culvert. These are your top priority projects. And it also includes the culverts that were done by Malone and McBroom. And I do have a cost there at the bottom, so you can see. And I did break out so that you have pipe or culvert replacements in one column. And then if you decide to do collector drains and the drain extensions, those are in the 2nd and 3rd columns. And then the private disconnects are typically, I believe, done by MDC. But this gives you kind of just an overview of all of the costs associated with all the tier 1 projects in both the phase 1, phase 2, and the culvert study. And to kind of show you, I know you might not know like where all these are, but I did produce a map. So I know it's a little hard to see, but each of them that's a tier 1 project is shown. So like this feet area is over here in the blue. And then you have the Fern Street East, which is this green in area 2. Then the Montclair Drive is this red area that's along Trout Brook, and it's Montclair. And then the Lynbrook is this pink area. Those are both in area 3. Then you have area 4 is this Arundel, and that's that large system I presented on earlier that comes down North Main Street across the School for the Deaf, and then goes down Arundel all the way to Brace. And then St. Joseph's Tributary is this large yellow area up here with Albany Ave, kind of as the middle road so that you can orientate yourself. And then Lawler Road is the one in green up here, and that has Trout Brook Drive and Lawler and Haynes, to give you an idea. So those are, and this graph is a lot better if it's printed out full size, if you do have some type of public meeting, or you can zoom into areas if you want as well. But it also then, the tier 1 projects include these locations where there's culvert improvements. So on Trout Brook Drive right here is one culvert. This is most downstream. And then the pedestrian culvert that's on Yukon campus. And then this system that includes the Lawler, Haynes, and Lindy Road system. And then the one on Albany Ave. So, sorry about that. And so now I want to just move on to just an overview of the groundwater study. I know in phase 1, we included a groundwater assessment. We reviewed, sorry guys, my clicker's very sensitive today. So the groundwater study that was included as part of phase 1 included looking at some historical information, determining depth of groundwater. And as we presented in the phase 1, there is a groundwater issue, and it's kind of significant in area 3. So there's approximately 85 houses within area 3 that have groundwater within 5 feet of their surface. And then there's an additional 90 houses that have groundwater within about 10 feet of their surface. So this is an area that's been, area 3 is an area that's been identified as a regional low elevation point, and it has high groundwater depths. And so we are doing a groundwater study to monitor groundwater in that area and look at the way the groundwater on the subsurface moves and whether it would be beneficial to implement some kind of groundwater collection system to help alleviate the groundwater issues in that area. And so now the next steps. So we are going to have a public meeting in October for the phase 2, the areas 4, 5, and 6. The groundwater study, which I just kind of mentioned, has been started, and that's for area 3. And then we do have the drainage system design, and those are the tier 1 systems. And they're in areas 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. So we're hopefully going to move forward with them. And then also the culvert replacement. So those culvert replacements along Trout Brook. And it's recommended that you always start downstream to upstream. So the 2 that are the highest priority are Trout Brook Drive and the Yukon pedestrian. And then the grant funding opportunities, we continue to look into that. And then also we continue MDC coordination for the house inspections and the collector drains. And so that is the end, and I will open it now to, or return it to the mayor, and she can, I'm sorry, Sherry.
That's okay. No, that's Cindy. That's fine. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to actually go back to either Matt or, and then I'm sure I know I have some questions. So I don't know, Matt, if you want to kind of close on it? I mean, just sort of, transition, or if we should just start with questions. I don't know if you have anything further.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. It looks like Mr. Martin wants to make a comment, but just before I turn to him, obviously this is a very complex issue and project. This was a lot of information for you to digest. I think it's a front burner issue for the town. It's going to continue to be one for the next several years. I imagine we're going to be discussing it with this committee on a very frequent basis. Understandably, you're going to need, you've already been spending time on this over the last couple of years. You're getting a bunch of new information today that you're going to need to spend some time with as well. But, I think this is the foundation of a good plan. So through you, Mayor, I'd like to turn to Mr. Martin for his comments, then we can open it up for Q&A.
Thanks so much, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor. I just wanted to add a couple comments. So first of all, there was some mention in the presentation about the private property connections, and that's an important point to focus on just briefly, in that because of the ages of a lot of the homes in West Hartford, when they were built, they were allowed to have their basement drainage systems connect to the sanitary sewer system, which is not allowed now. And that does create some issues with the sanitary sewer system, and surcharges of it can lead to basement flooding. So it's groundwater, it's flow getting into the sewer system that shouldn't be there. So it's interrelated, and that's really the relationship that I would like to work on with the MDC to work collaboratively moving forward. So in my opinion, what should happen is the town should focus its drainage improvement efforts within the public street right of way. And the MDC should be focusing its effort on the private property disconnects, like they've done for a couple of large projects in town already. So we are working on that as a positive collaborative approach going forward. That may also open the door, if we could work collaboratively with the MDC, to obtain grants, whereas if we just work individually, we may not qualify. I wanted to point that out. The Montclair Lynbrook neighborhood and the groundwater study, I wanted to point out why we're doing that and may not be focusing on doing a similar study in other areas of town. The reason is just the nature of that neighborhood. It's built around a water course, which actually used to go in a different path. It used to go pretty much straight through that neighborhood instead of around the Montclair Drive area. And there's a lot of groundwater issues. So we don't have street flooding. We have a little bit of street flooding in the neighborhood, but not like in other areas. So the problem isn't necessarily a lack of capacity in our drainage system. It's just the groundwater table is high at time, and the sewer can also surcharge. So that leads to basement flooding. That's why we're pursuing the groundwater study for that neighborhood, to see if there's other solutions that we can come up with. And then the last point I wanted to make is, while these drainage studies are a huge step and path forward, focusing on those 6 areas of town, which lead to about 10% of the town, we had flooding in other areas outside of the drainage study. So I don't want to let people think that we're not focusing beyond this, because we are. Especially the last 2 storm events, there was pretty much widespread flooding. Most of those other areas are smaller, and town staff can focus on potential solutions for those, but there are 2 that I just wanted to point out that are a little bit bigger, and we are also focusing on. One is the King Philip and Mohawk area of town. That's a repetitive flooding area, and that includes Brewster and Sconnet, Iroquois, some of the other streets in that area. They're just on the outskirts of the second or phase 2 drainage study. But we are looking for solutions to address the flooding in that area. And then the second area is down along the West Hartford line, Prospect Avenue, essentially Prospect at Boulevard down to Park Road. There's some flooding reoccurrence there as well. And so we're looking at studying that and coming up with solutions for that area. So just a few points I wanted to get across. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. So I just want to, just for information, the study, Cindy, that you have done, it's extensive. This is not, I mean, you really are getting in there and looking at the diameters of the pipes, understanding what's going on. And this has taken time to understand the extent of the problem. And I know that's a frustration to many, but when we're potentially going to look at investing over 100, close to $200 million plus, I think it will be over that. We really truly need to understand what that means. And hopefully we will have a significant assistance in that, because I think it will be very hard for the town to do this by ourselves. But we hope that our state and federal delegation will help to provide us with some resources, and we will do a lot of research into grant opportunities. But a couple of questions that I know my colleagues have, but one came across as the definition of flooding. Does flooding mean that there is, and I think Mr. Martin just clarified a little bit. Obviously, you have the water in the street kind of issues, and then you have basement water or yard water, right? So and there are different issues in different locations, but is there a way to define in this study how you defined flooding?
Yes, and I'm gonna give you a few definitions, because when we're looking at the culverts in the study that was done by Malone and McBroom, that is actually riverine flooding. And so they're dealing with the culverts, they're dealing with Trout Brook, the river system. And so their flooding is typically more widespread and is more kind of global, or because it's dealing with the water course. All the phase 1 and the phase 2 flooding is the drainage system. And so we were looking at all the pipes and looking at what flooding occurred during different scenarios. So it's kind of typical to use that 10-year design storm, where a storm that has a chance to occur 10% in any year. And that's kind of an industry standard. So we use that as when we identified a system as flooding, a drainage system as flooding. So when the pipes can't carry that 10-year storm or that 10% occurrence, then we documented it as having flooding. But we also took the information that Dwayne had, and also the information that your emergency services had, and we made sure that our model was showing flooding where it actually occurs, because that's important to have your model replicate what's actually happening. So did that answer your question?
I think it clarified it for me. There might be follow-up, I think, on that. Mr. Winograd, did you have a follow-up on that? Oh, Mr.
Yes,
Martin.
I did.
Oh,
I understand, because obviously a lot of this is about, and what we'll get from our residents is, why are we prioritizing this neighborhood versus that one? And so specifically, so if one neighborhood has, the street is flooded, clearly, nowhere for the water to go, you have a flooded street, there's a problem. But another neighborhood where that flooding is going beyond the roadbed and into people's basements, that's a little more, an extreme example and has a bigger concern. So I'm just wondering whether or not, when we say this particular area is flooding, are we talking about just street flooding, which is an inconvenience, versus the flooding that goes into people's basements and is really causing harm? And maybe those are related, but that's kind of the, how do we rank floodings?
Thank you, Ben. Mr. Martin actually wanted to comment, and then we will go to Cindy if there's further clarification on that. And then I really want to get to the committee members' questions too. So, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dwayne Martin, Town Engineer. So it's complex. The focus of these studies is to address street flooding. And the reason for that is street flooding, especially if it's long duration, can be a public safety issue. So if somebody can't get out of their home for some reason, or emergency services can't reach their home, obviously that's a public safety issue. But it's important to note that street flooding does not always mean that somebody's property or basement will flood. It can. In most cases, however, when somebody had basement flooding, because we've interacted with many people in different neighborhoods, they said, no, the street wasn't flooded, or my property wasn't flooded. Oftentimes that was related to the sanitary sewer surcharging, which is related to flooding. in that the sewer system can get clean water into it, whether it's an open joint or a connection from a property or a house. So they are interrelated, but oftentimes it was interesting when you'd ask a person, because they're upset that the street flooded in front of their house, did your basement flood? And they said no. And other times it was the opposite. The street didn't flood, but the basement flooded. So it's not always a direct connection. It can be. We have met with people where that happened. But that's why I'm interested in working collaboratively with the NBC, because it is interrelated to some extent.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. All right, because the screen is still can we take down the for now thank you, then I can see the. All right, I'm going to go to Lee to see if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor. I appreciate that. It's ironic that it's pouring outside and we're having this conversation, because it's obviously well apropos. I wanted a little more clarification on the private connection to the houses, how the costs are going to be implemented, whether or not it's going to be diverted to the homeowner. What, if any, costs will the homeowner incur to either set up the private connection and basically who pays for that? And then I think Dwayne Martin, you commented on kind of the MDC connection, and that kind of revolves around my second comment or question is, are we looking beyond our town? I mean, obviously water flows downhill and it goes down into ultimately, the valley area. Obviously Prospect Avenue is the line between Hartford and West Hartford. Is there communication, I guess, downstream, and are we working with other municipalities and maybe there's an opportunity to work with other municipalities collectively to address all these problems more of on a regional level?
Thank you, Lee. I don't know. I think I'll go right to Mr. Martin, but Matt, I'm sure will probably want to. Actually, Mr. Hart, do you want to go first? I saw your hand go up.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Councilor Gold, for your good questions there. On the private disconnects, let me touch on that and then turn to Mr. Martin. As he mentioned earlier, we are looking at a potential cost sharing arrangement with the MDC. We're in discussions with them now. And, we see this as one element, the private disconnects that they would handle. Undoubtedly, they would pass that cost on at some point to the customer. But one of the benefits of doing this through the MDC is they could pass it on to a much larger customer base. So we're actively discussing this with them now. And yes, some of the other communities, some of the other MDC towns are dealing with this issue as well. Newington and Wethersfield, parts of Windsor, I think, parts of Bloomfield, but not to the same extent we are. I think Newington and Wethersfield are probably the closest. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet today is the General Assembly last session did now authorize municipalities to create what's called a local stormwater utility. I think that's a model we're interested in for the future as well. A stormwater utility could help us fund probably O&M costs, operations and maintenance. Probably would not have capacity to certainly fund a large project of this size, but would be a tool and an instrument that we will seek to add to our toolkit. So let me pause there and ask Mr. Martin to elaborate on your questions.
Thank you, Matt. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dwayne Martin, Town Engineer. A couple things. So just to build off of what Matt said first and the point I was trying to make about the MDC and collaboration. The MDC would benefit from the removal of the clean water from their sanitary sewer system. They wouldn't have to go to people's basements and work with the residents. When those basements flood, they wouldn't have to do as much infrastructure improvements, whether it's on their sanitary sewer system or at their water treatment facility. So they would benefit. And that's the reason. It's not because I don't like the MDC. I think that we should be a partner with them and working to get these houses, these properties disconnected. And hopefully that cost doesn't go to the private property owner. But that structure and those options still need to be worked on. Related to your second question, if you look at the map for essentially all three drainage studies, they are discharging into Trout Brook, the watercourse, starting from Asylum Avenue and heading south. It all flows to that watercourse, either directly or eventually. That is a flood control facility, which was designed to withstand the volume of a flood event similar to the 1955 flood. That was the reason it was built. And so there may be areas within the drainage system before it gets to Trout Brook that we need to focus on to make sure by improving the drainage system, we're not impacting somebody. And that's why you want to work downgrade to upgrade. You have to do it in a certain manner to avoid that circumstance. But I don't believe we have an issue because once it gets to that flood control facility, it can handle it. We did ask that specific question as it related to the Myelona McBroom study for the culverts, because you're opening these water courses up and allowing more to flow, which is great for the upstream properties. But what happens downstream when all that water continues on? And they analyzed that and they said it's not a problem. It raised the water course inches, not feet. So it was not an issue. So I do not believe we're going to have an issue. But to your point, it all flows to Hartford. And whether or not, that's an issue, I don't believe so either, because it's that flood control facility continued on into Hartford.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Vogt.
Also, for now, I'll let other committee members ask questions.
Sure. Now I'll go to Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you. And thank you, Cindy, for that presentation. It was a very comprehensive. I'm happy to hear that this is on the front burner, because no doubt it's a front burner issue. I don't really have a lot of questions. I really appreciated Ben's question and the answer to that. Let's say we get the funding and the remediation is planned out. Best case scenario, and I know you don't like to work in that world, but from a timing perspective, how soon do you think you would see us actually physically addressing the issue?
Thanks, Beth. That is obviously the question of on so many residents' minds, and this is anyway. I think I'll start with Matt on this, and then go to Mr. Martin. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Multi-year project to be sure. Decades when we're looking at town-wide. Mr. Martineau can answer specifically the timeline for the projects we're looking to lead off with.
Thank you, Matt. Mr. Hart. Sorry, Martin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the way I've been explaining it to people is if we had the funding to handle all of these drainage improvements that are recommended, we're probably looking at a 20-year plan. But we're not going to be able to do that, I don't believe. So it's going to be longer duration than that. The other way of looking at it too, there's a couple. One is it depends on where you are within the project. So in most cases, if the person owns property and they're close to Trout Brook, the water course, or on the downgrade end, that's where we're going to be starting the improvements, because you work downhill to up. So it could depend on where you are within the drainage improvement area or the neighborhood. So let's just assume we agree on the projects we want to focus on. We have the funding in place. Those people that are in that particular location may see a benefit within 3 to 5 years. It may be short duration, but there's a lot of factors involved in that. But that's an estimated time frame.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Ms. Kerrigan.
No, thank you. I mean, the scope of this issue and its solution is immense and it's complex. So, Dwayne, you sort of answered some of my questions, having experienced severe flooding in the house. I think public safety on the streets is important, but the convenience of your house flooding is certainly an issue as well. But thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. Yeah, this is. I mean, this has been an ongoing issue for many homeowners. Although in the last that week or 10-day period where we saw 3 historic storms together, I think almost everybody was impacted by that, and in a pretty big way. So anyway. All right, so we can go back now to other committee members. So if I don't see you, just give a little shout out. Any other questions from non-committee members? Sorry, council members. Okay, I don't see any right now. So Mr. Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dwayne Martin, Town Engineer. If you agree, Joel Liberty from CDM Smith is here, and he works a lot with the MDC. It may be beneficial just to understand what I meant by having it explained better than I did. The opportunity, if we work collaboratively with the MDC, to be able to obtain grants.
That's helpful. Thanks, Mr. Martin. Okay, Joe.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So Joe LaLiberty with CDM Smith. I know you're specifically asking me to talk on the grants, but I just wanted to touch back on the flooding question, if I might. The flooding in the street was really what we were geared at, and I know that that was already answered that way, but we took into account the flooding in the basements and in the yards. What we found when we did the study is the flooding in the basement and the yards, and we saw a video when we kicked off this project where you had groundwater that was coming up through a basement floor, and there was a video of it. That's not related to flooding in the street. So a lot of the basement backups that are occurring and the flooding in the yards and in the basements, it's stemming from groundwater that's getting into the basements that then, because these houses were built with foundation drains that go to the sanitary sewer that are now illegal, the sanitary sewer wasn't sized to take all this flow. So we sized the drains to take it. But the reality is, in order to solve that second problem of the basement backups and the groundwater, it needs to be addressed separate, and it can be in the same project, but it's a different thing than just building larger pipes in the street. So the groundwater study that was mentioned, at the end of Cindy Bauman's presentation, the reason for doing that is to look at, is there a way where we could do a perforated pipe in the street or some other thing where potentially we can lower the groundwater in the area where it's causing the most trouble. If we can lower the groundwater, then that would help solve the problem to the houses. And so in doing that study, that's what we're trying to get at. Then the water wouldn't go in wouldn't go in the sewer pipe, and you wouldn't have to redirect it over to the drain. You'd just be lowering the groundwater table. And then separately, as has been mentioned a couple times, in coordination with the MDC, it's who is responsible and how would actual private property connections be removed. They're currently technically illegal. They don't belong in the sewer system. They belong in the drain. The drain right now obviously is undersized. That's why you're getting all the street flooding. So the first thing that needs to happen is the drain needs to either be upsized or extended. And then the second thing that needs to happen is then you'd have to have these drain connections, similar to a sewer connection, that would take the groundwater flow from the house versus it going to the sewer system. So to answer the question on the funding, it's my belief, I've said it, many times, that there is clean water funding from DEP that's available. It's a 50% grant for CSOs, combined sewer overflows. That grant is typically for projects that are in the city of Hartford because they have a combined sewer system. But I don't see why the case can't be made that the flow from West Hartford goes into Hartford, which then, goes to Hartford plant. And we've heard it, many times, where the dry weather flow from West Hartford is in the neighborhood of 8 MGD, million gallons per day, and the wet weather flow is about 80. The treatment plant, the dry weather capacity of the treatment plant is 90. So to me, it is a combined sewer overflow problem. And I think that if the MDC and West Hartford could join together and use, delegations and whatnot, I feel like if it could get classified as a combined sewer overflow issue that we're trying to solve, the best case scenario is you could convince them that, it's eligible for that 50% grant. There's other grants that are out there as well. Obviously, there's the ARPA funding that the town is receiving, and then there's FEMA grants. And I know that I've been talk with Dwayne. Dwayne, you guys submitted the BRIC grant last year for the 5 culvert projects. I know that didn't succeed, but the state hazard mitigation officer has followed up with Dwayne, saying that he thinks that it might be eligible for a different grant, and I've been coordinating with Dwayne as to, what we can submit by January related to that grant application. So there certainly is funding, and actually there also is the, multi-trillion-dollar, the couple infrastructure bills that are coming out. How will those come out? Will there be, there is talks of the bad word earmarks. There is talks of the earmarks coming back. And the best way to line yourself up for those is to go through the, the state delegation and see if you can be on their priority to get some of that grant money when that comes out. So I don't know if that, hopefully, Mr. Martin, that answered the question.
Thank you, Mr. La Liberty. That's helpful. And we will be discussing in finance and budget the ARPA. We do have some suggested or proposed, I would say, investments in this, but we received in total, $25 million in ARPA money in total, which we have a lot of need for, and then 10 million from the community level. So there's not it pales in compared to what we will need. So, let's see. Any other questions, comments from counselors? So I just to follow up, the culvert rebuilding of those culverts, that will help with groundwater in that area. I mean, is there a way? I'm not sure of what the culvert component sort of does to the next, to that. If you could just explain that in maybe more non-engineering terms. Thanks. Thank you, Ms. Warren.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dwayne Martin, Town Engineer again. So this was the first study that we did, and the reason for that was there was street flooding that was occurring in the former UConn campus area, specifically Asylum Avenue and Troppert Drive. Major roadways in town. Again, the roads were shut down, so not easy to get around in some cases, and concerns about emergency response. Upstream of, I think it's Lawler Road, there is a neighborhood that had sustained flooding during heavy rain events, Lindy Lane in particular. And that's why that study occurred. There was about 25 properties that are in that flood zone that have flood insurance, and oftentimes their basements would get flooded as well. And so we did the study, and we found out that it's not the water courses, because people were saying there's trees in the water courses that are slowing the flow and the culverts get blocked. That contributes, but the ultimate problem was the culverts were undersized. And so the study showed that if we're able to increase the size, replace the culverts with larger ones, the flow would be improved, and we could remove approximately 25 houses from floodplain. It also removes some of the flood expansion into the former UConn campus property, more so on the east side, the parking lot side, if you will. So that's why we're considering doing that project.
Okay, and did you have a separate cost of that project?
Yes, I believe, I thought there was a table in the presentation. I don't know, Cindy, if you can bring that back up.
Yeah, I was looking on mine, but I couldn't find that particular piece. I'm sure it's in there. There's a lot of information.
So Cindy, this is Matt Hart. That would be the Tropic Drive culvert items listed here.
So it's the bottom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Correct.
So, okay. So
couldn't
one,
find the other one.
2.5, 3.5, I mean, 5.5, 6. Yeah, about 8 million-ish. Okay. All right. So I'm sure that when we go through our community outreach, there's going to be a lot more specific questions from residents on how this will impact them and obviously the prioritization as we go, because I think that's a real, what everybody is concerned about, especially when you're talking about a long-term project. All right, so just go through the next steps again, and then we will, and time frame on those. I think we had a general, maybe Matt can talk about the time frame on those, and then we can wind up this meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Let me start off and then turn to Mr. Martin to add to my comments. So we do need to present the results of this study to the public. We're planning to have the public information session next month. Then also CDM Smith is engaging in the groundwater study for the Area 3 as discussed. And then we would begin design for the areas that they have noted here. On a parallel track, while we're working on the design, we would continue our conversation with the MDC, and our goal is to come to an agreement, a memorandum of understanding in terms of how we would handle the disconnect from the sanitary sewer and then the connection to the stormwater line, the cost sharing approach that Mr. Martin and I talked about. We'll be doing that, having that conversation with the MDC. We've already begun that. Something else I think we will be focused on in the year ahead is establishing a stormwater utility, pursuing the grant opportunities in collaboration with the MDC, as Mr. La Liberté discussed as well. In terms of the time frame to complete the design, I would need to defer to Mr. Martin or Ms. Baumann on that. But a lot of these things are going to happen. We're going to be working on a lot of these things simultaneously.
Yeah, and in the meantime, we also will be keeping our delegation informed and working with them to investigate any kind of opportunities. Correct? We've already talked to.
Yes.
Yeah, Representative.
Our federal delegation, I think.
Federal and state, right?
Yes.
Federal for sure, and yeah, and then we will be looking at our own. Our own resources and what we can accomplish in that. So
to the point you made earlier, Mayor, we do have some monies built into our existing capital improvement program. The council will also be reviewing a recommendation from staff on the use of rescue plan funds. And we are going to be recommending that we utilize a significant portion of those monies for these projects.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments before we adjourn?
I was just wondering if Mr. Martin or Ms. Baumann could elaborate on the time frame to complete the design.
Thank you. Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dwayne Martin again, Town Engineer. I think once we have the funding and agree upon moving forward with the recommendations, we're probably looking at a year and a half to 2 years to go through survey, design, and permitting. It's important to note that, as I mentioned before, a lot of the first phase projects would be starting from the low end or working at a water course. Those would require permits from inland wetlands and possibly the state, especially if we're adding a new discharge into a water course. So that first phase for those areas may take a little bit more time from a permitting standpoint. We've entertained the idea of not cutting up these projects into phases, but perhaps doing the design and permitting all at once. And that way you're kind of working through the permitting and getting that resolved. But I would say that once we have the path set with respect to the phasing of the projects and the funding, we're probably about 1.5 to 2 years to get from the start of the design to starting construction. I think it would also be beneficial for us to use that next step slide and create a schedule, because there's a lot of concurrent activities. It's not a linear path. And so we need to pin those down so that we're all on the same page and understand what the overall schedules are, because we're getting asked already by residents, and it's certainly understandable. And so we really need to figure that out so that we have a better response to them.
Yeah, that's definitely something I was going to suggest that we work on. There's going to be a lot of simultaneous work being done, and that 1.5 is not a waiting period. It's there will be work being done. Actually, I did have one more question. Consent decree from the MDC, is that how does that factor into this? Is there a quick answer for that, or can you not answer that question? Is that for them? Mr. Martin, I'll go to you.
If you're okay with it, I would actually suggest Joe Liberty is probably best to answer that question.
Thanks. Thank you. Mr. LaLiberty?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Joe LaLiberty with CDM Smith. The consent decree, the primary goal was to eliminate the structural SSO discharges. And those are outfalls on the sanitary sewer system. They're actually located down near the West Hartford line. And those will get addressed through the South Tunnel project. The South Tunnel project actually is probably will surface by the end of the year. The tunnel will break through. I'm sure you'll hear all about that, but that's not what you're asking about. But it'll probably be 2 years before those get connected. Then the consent decree talks about taking private flow out of the sewer system, and that's where we've been saying it needs to be some joint effort between the two, and that's what we've been talking about. The consent decree technically would be achieved by eliminating the sanitary sewer overflows, but the objective to reduce clean water flow from the sewer system goes on forever.
Right. Okay. Thank you. All right. I think that's all we have for today. Just know that this is a high priority item for us, but it is a big project and will take a lot of effort and thought and time and commitment to get this done. So, all right. Thank you all for participating. I appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day. And I hope you can stay dry. So with that, we're going to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mayor.
Bye.
Thank you.